Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Capital One.
Who's in? It is the most fundamental of all playoff questions and typically answered by who did you play, who did you beat, how good did you look doing it, are you one of the four best? But this year there's a new question. Did you play enough games? And for Ohio State sitting at number 4 last week, that might turn out to be the most important question.
If we've learned anything this year, through the change and challenge, gained any understanding through its promise and pain.
I don't think there's anybody more anxious to get on the field than Trevor Lawrence.
It's the power of a word we so often overlook. Now. This is all we have, and it's what they've earned.
It's a foot race to the end zone. Touchdown!
For all they've fought against, to have this second in time to know how they rank and where they stand. They may yet rise and fall, advance and recede. But for this instant, they've made it far enough to be counted.
The Irish wear down the Carolina defense.
They've made it to the only place any of us can really claim, and all of us should cherish. Now.
Nobody got knocked off in the top 7 last week. If it remains unchanged from one week to the next, that hasn't happened in the history of the college football playoff. Earlier today, the 13-member committee meeting in Grapevine, Texas. 2 more editions of the rankings coming out before the final rankings on December 20th, which will lead us to the semifinals in the Rose and Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day and then the national championship game on January 11th. 30-minute show tonight, College Football Playoff Top 25. So we're going to get after it. Rece Davis with you. You know all the guys who join us every week. Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack, Joey Galloway, and Jesse Palmer. We'll hear from them in just a second. First, here are the storylines leading into this next edition of the College Football Playoff Rankings. Top 3 teams took care of business. Started on Friday with Notre Dame beating on North Carolina. Alabama blew out Auburn in the Iron Bowl, and with the return of Trevor Lawrence, Clemson was rolling easily over Pittsburgh. Northwestern was a top 10 team until they went to the banks of the Red Cedar, and Michigan State knocked them off. They're still in the driver's seat for the Big Ten West. And there were a couple of top 10 teams from the state of Ohio that didn't get to play, with Ohio State and Cincinnati both not being able to play a week ago. Ohio State had some COVID concerns. Ryan Day tested positive and won't be able to coach the game against Michigan State this weekend. Cincinnati lost its game against Temple, but the Bearcats remain undefeated. And just today, there came some news from the ACC about some rescheduling. Here's the bottom line. They're going to play 9-game schedule or be evaluated on that. So Notre Dame has clinched a spot in the ACC championship game. Clemson can do the same if it's able to beat Virginia Tech on Saturday night. Neither team will have to play before the ACC championship game. Should Clemson lose, then Miami would still have a shot if the Hurricanes were able to win out. Kirk, what's your reaction to the ACC making sure that one team didn't have to play the week before the championship game and the other one got the week off?
I think it makes sense in this era of unpredictability and just trying to get everybody on the same page. Clearly, the athletic directors got together with John Swofford and talked this out to just make sure, as I said, with uncertainty, to make sure everybody's on the same page. Both teams will now be entering Charlotte with that bye week to be able to be prepared, to get healthy, to get everybody as ready as they can be regarding COVID and go out and play. And I think the big thing is, to me, Notre Dame is the big thing. I mean, not only have they secured a spot into Charlotte, respectfully to Syracuse, I think they're going to pummel Syracuse. They to me, maybe they've secured a spot into the playoff, because even if they lose to Clemson, there's a really good chance that they're still going to stay in the top 4.
They were already in great position, barring some type of blowout loss to the Tigers, which would be very hard to foresee when you watch this Irish team play so far. Okay, let's get to the rankings now. College Football Playoff Top 25 rankings brought to you by Capital One. Remember, we don't see them until you do, so we're going to unveil them together, and let's start At number 25, Billy Napier's Louisiana Raging Cajuns get into the field for the first time. Marshall is undefeated. Also sitting at number 21, Washington has also entered the rankings from the Pac-12. Oregon took a big tumble. Let's go 20 now through 16. Southern California's only played 3 games, 2 more left on the schedule. They're in there. Iowa makes a big jump there. 2 losses are close. And Coastal Carolina, College Game Day, going to see the Chanticleers against Liberty coming up this weekend. Wisconsin has only played 3 games, but still getting some respect from the committee. North Carolina lost to Notre Dame and went up a couple of spots. This next position here is, I think, what we're looking for after last week and where BYU was at 14 coming into the week. Let's look at 15 up now. And BYU only makes a small surge. Northwestern takes the big drop. Kirk, only 1 spot up for BYU. What's your reaction?
That was my big thing I wanted to see. All the feedback we had for the committee, not just us, but around the entire country, it was unanimous. People thought BYU was a top 10 team, but the committee holds strong. Only moves them to 1 spot ahead of Northwestern. Again, very, very surprised by that ranking.
Okay, Oklahoma with its 2 losses, but the Sooners appear to be on track to making it into the Big 12 championship game. They are sitting at number 11. Got through 25 through 11. Now let's go into the top 10. And at number 10, as I told you, Miami still has a chance playing the ACC championship game. They need Clemson to lose to Virginia Tech, and the Hurricanes need to win their remaining games. Just ahead of Miami is Iowa State. Now, last week they didn't respect the head-to-head of Iowa State beating Oklahoma. Joey, what do you think about Iowa State jumping 4 spots by surviving against Texas this weekend?
Well, I think the fact that they beat Texas was enough. And I think in this era, when we're talking about eye tests, and Rece, you just touched on a second ago, North Carolina moved up in losing to Notre Dame, and USC moved down a couple spots. And so it's interesting in this era of eye test. Iowa State showed the committee something by beating Texas, even though it was a close game, but they won that game, they move into the top 10.
I think it's a pretty big jump when you consider that Texas really helped them win that game on Friday. Let's look at 1 spot above Iowa State. It's Georgia. They found a quarterback. Georgia is at number 8. What about number 7? 1 spot ahead of the Dogs. And Cincinnati is still sitting at 7. Jesse, what do you think about the Bearcats not moving yet? He didn't get to play this past week. Are you okay with where they are?
Yeah, I'm okay with where they are. Their resume took a big hit, though, guys, when SMU lost to East Carolina this past weekend. They need that strength of record and strength of schedule to be as high as possible. Good news for them, Tulsa's still ranked. They're obviously going to get a chance to play Tulsa twice, do the best they can to impress the committee. But you got to imagine sitting at 11-0 at the end of the season, Group of 5 champion, that's not going to be enough on its own. They still need help ahead of them. We've all talked about that. We know that moving forward, but I'm good with Cincinnati right now at 7.
I think that's something the American ought to consider, too. They're going to make Cincinnati and Tulsa play a couple of times back-to-back, which could just be a potential banana peel for the Bearcats. David, we've gone 7 through 25. What's your reaction to what you've seen so far?
We always want this to be about a certain thing. And what do we want it to be? We want to be the best team. It's hard to say that, but what the committee is always going to show us time and time again is who you beat is important to them. And, you know, there's like USC dropping. USC hadn't beaten a team that's won a game yet. Like, I'm perfectly okay with USC being there. You look at Oregon dropping, the Pac-12 obviously completely out of the race. I'm very interested to watch the Big 12, by the way, the Big 12's path. Iowa State jumping up, a very respected Oklahoma team, by the way, ranked pretty high. Is there a path maybe if Notre Dame beats Clemson again where a Big 12 team could come into the mix if Florida lost to Alabama? So a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, sorry, but I think it's interesting to look at that.
Adding to the intrigue this year, we've decided in this early part of the rankings, we're going to reveal 1 through 6 in the most dramatic order as told to me by our producer, Cavman. Cavman is playing it straight down the line, going 1 through 6. So let's look at the top 6 in the second edition of the College Football Playoff Rankings brought to you by Capital One. Alabama has now been number 1 in the College Football Playoff Rankings more than every other team combined. Crimson Tide there for the 20th time. Just behind them, I think we're going to see Notre Dame, and we do. The Irish as complete as any team in the country. Kirk, you've called them, you think, maybe the most complete team in the country.
Yeah, I really think they have an argument. I think Alabama could be 1A and Notre Dame could be 1B. Every aspect of their game is impressive, and as I said last week, they're playing with a chip on their shoulder, out to prove everybody wrong.
At number 3, just behind Notre Dame, the game that we presume we're going to see for the second time in the ACC championship game. Notre Dame, as I told you a couple of minutes ago, is there. Clemson only has to beat Virginia Tech on Saturday, and that would be their final regular season game before the ACC title game against the Fighting Irish if the Tigers can win. Now, number 4, Ohio State had a game canceled because of COVID concerns, and we'll see if the Buckeyes, now Ohio State having played just 4 games, and 4 games is enough right now to hold on to the number 4 spot. So the Buckeyes, they're on their way to play Michigan State without Ryan Day on Saturday, are still at number 4. Let's see who's number 5. There's going to be Florida and Texas A&M, but the order is the question. A&M beat Florida in a regular season game head-to-head, so at the moment, A&M still having the edge with that head-to-head. But that, look, Florida can still jump into this. Florida, if it makes it all the way to the SEC championship game, they're going to get a shot at Alabama, and that, one would presume, would trump the head-to-head loss that Florida has against Texas A&M. So, Kirk, what's your reaction to the top 6? And we have the top 7 just as it was a week ago.
Well, I look at this, and I think you make a great point for people in the SEC that are either excited or concerned about Florida and A&M. That will take care of itself. So that's almost a moot point. I think a lot of people wanted to see where Ohio State would be. The concern on Friday and Saturday was Ohio State. Are they going to have to shut down their operation? Are they going to potentially miss the Michigan State game? Maybe miss of course, the Illinois game. Are they going to have enough to be able to play against Ohio or against Michigan? And are they going to miss the Big Ten championship? And how is the committee going to evaluate them? The fact that they've played 4 games and they're still sitting there in the top 4, now it comes down to they were going to play Michigan State Saturday. I still think Michigan waves the white flag, potentially avoids playing Ohio State next week, and then, David, they'll potentially get a game on the 19th. They could be sitting there with 6 games. And Michigan, is that fair, David? Michigan could opt out basically of that game and keep Ohio State out of 6 games to qualify for the Big Ten championship. That doesn't make sense to me, but that potentially could happen next week.
If you can't beat them, then try to keep them out of the playoff another way. I mean, if you're Michigan, you've been getting beat like a drum. I guess some other approach might work. But I tell you what, I still look at this and I say there's only one team outside of the top 4 that controls its own destiny, and it's not the 5th team in the country. It's Florida. I mean, Florida has an opportunity to play Alabama in the SEC championship game and make their way into the college football playoff. So, I mean, if you're a Florida fan, you got to be excited. And don't worry about the A&M head-to-head and where you're at right now, because you've got a big opportunity ahead of you to get in the college football playoff. So that's a pretty awesome spot for Florida to be in.
For Ohio State, watching these rankings, I think they got some good news. I think Indiana right now, number 12. The committee respects them still, even though with Michael Penix going down at quarterback. Wisconsin at 16. And Iowa now ranked, because all 3 of those teams directly impact Ohio State's chances, I think, of reaching the playoff if, in fact, they don't qualify to play in the Big Ten championship game. Indiana, we know, is their best win so far. Ohio State could play Wisconsin in this quote-unquote Big Ten championship weekend if, in fact, they don't qualify for the Big Ten championship game. And by the way, Wisconsin could be ranked higher than Northwestern in that game. So in a crazy way, Joey, Ohio State's strength of record could actually be better if they don't play in the Big Ten championship game. Now, Wisconsin still has 2 ranked teams left. We'll see what happens with Indiana with the injury at quarterback. But, you know, with that better strength of record, with that Trump potentially not playing in the conference championship in the committee's eyes, it could be a wild situation unfolding.
Yeah, and I think if you're Ohio State, you're sort of still in a nervous situation. I think we're assuming that, let's just say they don't get the rest of their games in. Let's say they don't go to the Big Ten championship game. The fact that the committee in their first rankings had Ohio State sitting at number 4 behind a 1-loss Clemson team would make me a little nervous, especially when I look right behind me and I start to think about how Florida's playing, how Texas A&M is playing. Now, we've said that will play itself out. Florida will have a chance to play its own self into this thing, but let's just say Florida continues to win. They get to the SEC championship game, and it's a very close game against Alabama, a team that we all believe is the number 1 clear-cut team in the country. Let's say they go play them down to the last second. I just think it opens up a lot of doors and a lot of conversations for this committee to say, look, the way these teams are playing right now, we only have a small sample of Ohio State, but the way these other teams are playing, we do believe that they are just flat out better. I just think it opens a lot of doors for discussion if Ohio State doesn't get to play more games.
And just for those who might not realize, if Ohio State doesn't play at least 6 Big Ten games, as it stands right now with the number of games the Big Ten requires to get in the conference championship, they wouldn't be eligible. If some other games are canceled, perhaps that number changes. But look, guys, I'm not going to sit here and let this stand that you guys just implied, and perhaps you didn't want to. I'll give you a chance to clarify it if you want, that Michigan will opt out of the game and dodge the game simply to keep Ohio State out of the championship game. If you're being facetious, that's perfectly fine, but I'm going to give you a chance to clarify there, if that's because I don't believe that for a second. It might not be able to play because they've paused activities, but I don't think they'll dodge it. I mean,
I don't know all the. I know they shut down their operation this week, and I don't know all the numbers as far as their COVID is concerned. I'm just saying we live in such a strange world that I've talked to a lot of coaches around the country that have said they really feel teams are opting out to avoid playing games because they don't want to get humiliated. They don't want to get. They don't want to lose with the team that they have. They don't necessarily have too many COVID positives. They just don't want to have to take the field with the team they have and go get embarrassed. So they're basically waving the white flag and saying we can't play. So there's a lot of that's being talked about around the country. I'm not suggesting, I have no idea what Michigan's situation is. I'm saying they have the power to potentially say, hey, we can't play next week. And there's nothing Ohio State could do about it if they decide to say that.
That is true. I'll say this. Any team that does that they're not teaching any kind of lesson. They don't stand for anything. They have no courage. They have no character. Anybody that would do that purposely just to sabotage another team. Other than that, I'll say I don't really have an opinion on it. I know it already has happened a couple of times, I know, but another thing for another long show. Gary Barta will join us to answer some of the questions about the rankings coming up. He is the chair of the selection committee. And we're working our way toward the Champions Classic. Michigan State and Duke first, Kansas and Kentucky later. There is DJ Stewart. Had a pretty good debut for the Devils.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Capital One. What's in your wallet? And in part by Allstate. You've never been in better hands. You're watching College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Capital One.
Coming up at the bottom of the hour, it's the start of our State Farm Champions Classic doubleheader here at Cameron Indoor Stadium. It's number 6 Duke hosting number 8 Michigan State.
A typical Michigan State team. They rebound, they play great defense, an outstanding passing team led by Joey Hauser, the transfer from Marquette. And Duke, as a young team, likes to drive the ball. They want to pressure, and Jalen Johnson had 19 points, 19 rebounds in the opener.
Michigan State coach Tom Izzo called him a mini Magic, high praise when it comes from East Lansing. No fans tonight here at Cameron. We won't have a bunch of cheering Rece Davises in attendance tonight.
Oh, I'll be cheering for you, Sean, from afar, as always. Great doubleheader coming up. Michigan State and Duke, Sean and Jay on the call there. That's coming up next. It'll be followed by Kansas and Kentucky, 9:30 Eastern Time. You're just joining us. This is the top 6, same as it was last week in the college football playoff rankings. Bama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and Florida. Pleased to be joined by the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Gary Barta, who is also the athletic director at Iowa. Gary, the story in the sport the last few days has been the situation at Ohio State. How would you describe the committee's position on number of games played relative to where they're going to be ranked?
Well, as everybody knows, we did not have an additional game to evaluate this week, so the last game we watched was a good win over Indiana. A lot of discussion about the number of games that a team plays, and it's not anybody's fault, but trying to evaluate a team that has 4 games in versus a team that has 7, 8, or 9 games in is definitely a problem, and it's created by the pandemic. But so the more games a team brings to the committee, the more we have to evaluate.
So what was that discussion like? How would you describe what the discussions were? Because you already have teams in your top 4 that have twice as many wins as Ohio State has played games.
It was talked about a lot, and is specifically talked about in the room about whether or not Ohio State goes to 4, or if Texas A&M flips and goes to 4 and Ohio State goes to 5. A lot of discussion about that. At the end of the day, the offensive firepower of Ohio State, all the weapons they have, the win over Indiana, and then we did have an additional game to evaluate in Texas A&M. They beat LSU 20-7. But at the end of the day, the committee just decided that Ohio State was still a better team than Texas A&M, deserved to be 4, but definitely a lot of discussion about number of games played.
Gary, when we've talked, and you've mentioned it a couple of times here in terms of watching games played and how important the football judgment is, and one thing that has struck us here is how that affects where BYU sits. They're up 1 spot from last week, but I'm not going to be disingenuous. I think they should be ranked higher. Most of the guys here do as well. What is it that's holding BYU in the position that it's in behind some teams that have lost a couple of games?
I said last week, great respect for BYU, but what is it that holds it back if you compare BYU's, the games they've played, the teams against whom they've competed, and you compare those to some other teams, it's really the strength of schedule or the games that they're playing and not being as strong as some of the other teams that we're ranking ahead of them.
It's a difficult task for sure with BYU. They have one more opportunity to impress the committee. Gary, we appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks much, guys.
All right, there's Gary Barta. He will be with us every Tuesday night, the next 2 regular season rankings, and then the final rankings coming on December 20th. Ohio State plans to be able to play without Ryan Day. Larry Johnson will be the acting head coach for the Buckeyes. That's noon on ABC. Michigan State coming off that win against Northwestern this past week. And a reminder that today is Giving Tuesday, a global day of giving. Also the launch of ESPN's V Week. We can all be a part of something big by supporting cancer research. It's really needed now more than ever. If you're able, give at v.org/donate. 100% of your donation goes to cancer research.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Let's take a look at the All-State playoff predictor. Alabama's got a pretty good shot, 96%. Ohio State, despite the 4 games, still sitting there at 78%, with Notre Dame and Clemson with good chances to make it. These are the New Year's 6 bowl projections. Jesse, could we see Clemson, Notre Dame 3, really? Would you expect that?
I'm all for it, too. Let's get a rubber match going, potentially, based on what happens in the ACC title game.
If Notre Dame wins, Clemson will be eliminated. If Clemson wins, that is a possibility. I know it's been a quick show. Love to hear more from the guys. You'll hear a lot more from people on College Game Day and throughout the week, the coverage of college football on the playoffs. But right now, we're getting ready to go to basketball, and I'll see you from the Hoop Studio.